walk into the restaurant.
I grabbed a vase and I smashed it with a mat in his
One
head.
of those girls on the poster.
Papa, did you enjoy the striptease?
He was a liar. He had lied to me about everything.
I think I became a lesbian that night.
Giving me a heart attack. And then he laughed.
The scream is powerful.
We're all gonna die. We're all going to die.
My daughters are giving birth to larvae, and it's my birthday.
I'm just gonna tell it like it is.
It took about a year for all of my sight to eventually go. So I'm totally blind now.
I guess I assumed that all of the testing and whatnot that happens, women feel, well, if I have a mammogram, for example, and it's okay, then I'm okay. Well, I had a mammogram and it was okay, but it wasn't okay.
So it was pretty shocking when 4 years ago in July, on a Saturday morning, the phone rang and her husband told me, without much preliminary, that she was dying.
Tell it like it is.
So, grade 1, there were 2 girls who lived not very far away who were asked to walk me home from school my first day. One of them was one of 6 children, and she kind of took me under her wing, and I really, from that moment on, lived at her house. Her parents liked me, her brothers and sisters liked me. They had fun, they loved food, they loved music. There was a lot of fooling at their house, and being her friend changed me.
When I was 4, I was diagnosed with diabetes and had to get used to living with taking insulin injections every day and being aware of everything I ate and being careful with everything. And I basically, aside from the diabetes, had a pretty normal life. When I was a teenager, I became a bit of a rebel with that and didn't take the best care of myself. And at the age of 21, I began having complications. Christmas Day, I woke up and in front of my right eye was just gray.
Well, back in October of 2001, I found a lump in my breast. And initially, I wasn't all that concerned. I knew that the majority of lumps turn out to be nothing. Well, about a week after the biopsy, I get a call from my doctor's office saying, "Can you come into the office?" Well, I knew what that meant, because they never call you when the news is good. They only call you when the news is bad. So at first I said, "Why don't you just tell me right now on the phone I have cancer? I don't really feel like wasting time coming into the office." But they said, no, we have to see you in person and all that.
I didn't want to deal with it. I just kept thinking, no. And I lived on my own still for ages. And finally I was at a point where I couldn't see to do my own insulin.
When we were 13, my parents decided that I had to be sent to another school. But we remained friends. In the end, she married one of my husband's good friends. And then, of course, life took its course. We had children. They moved to another city. We moved. And we, I think, grew differently. We spoke on the phone. It was only 2 or 3 times a year. But when that happened, there were no preliminaries. It was immediate contact and immediate connection. So it was pretty shocking when, on a Saturday morning, the phone rang and her husband told me, without much preliminary, that she was dying.
Sure enough, the doctor said to me, "It is cancer." I burst out into tears, I remember. Even though I was expecting the news, it still was sort of that confirmation that puts you right over the edge. I immediately phoned my husband. Naturally, he was quite upset. It was kind of, all the worst fears just got confirmed here.
It took about a year for all of my sight to eventually go. So I'm totally blind now. I went into periods where I was very, I guess you could call it self-pity, just not nice to be around because I was just feeling so down. It was tough.
The next few days were pretty difficult, just going through all those classic stages of denial and then ultimately grudging acceptance.
She came on the phone and her voice was a sort of a weird croak. It was really not her voice. All that I recognized was a kind of intonation and inflection, how she used words. And it was pretty straightforward. She said to me, "I'm dying." And I said, "Well, I want to see you." And And she said, well, you better come quickly.
What was also plaguing me at the time was, how public should I go with this information about my health? I'm president of the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, which is a lobby group for small and medium-sized businesses in Canada. Often people have the tendency to kind of panic if they hear someone who has an influence on their life, like the president of their company, is ill, could maybe die, and of course the C word itself is also a pretty big trigger. So basically, after contemplating all of this, and also taking into account that I'm a private person that usually likes to handle things on my own and not sort of blat everything to the world, especially of a personal nature, I opted not to tell people. I didn't even tell my children or my mother, because I felt at that point I had too little information. And why have them stew if this was all ultimately going to be resolved in a positive way?
I met Warren through my dad had a friend that had mentioned Warren's name, and Warren is also sight impaired or legally blind, and he is an expert in computer training, and at the time I was needing some help with learning the computer. We'd end up talking about music or different things, and he said, well, would you like to go on a date? And I said, sure. We just continued on right from that point as a couple. The relationship grew stronger, and it felt like the right time to get married and start living our own life together.
The outcome of the surgery was actually very positive. They found the cancer had not gone into my lymph nodes, which is a major good development. And as a result, they prescribed a course of treatment subsequent to that. And in late January of 2002, started the chemo treatment. And of course, given my subterfuge in trying to keep all of this sort of under the radar screen, this was going to present a new challenge.
Tell it like it is.
I arrive and I get myself to their house. And then when I first saw her, you can't be prepared when you haven't seen somebody for a while for what that kind of cancer does to them. We had 3 days. The first day I was cluttering it up, was trying to talk and tell stories and show off all the things that I'd brought to amuse her. And then I realized, that was me. I wanted that. All that she needed was to have me be there and to not be alone. Her family had been in the habit of going about their business during the day and leaving her alone for hours at a stretch.
And it just so happened the peak of my hair loss occurred exactly the time we had a board meeting. Over this weekend meeting, my hair was falling out in clumps. And my hair was longer at the time. It was about shoulder length. And I remember wearing it up, like pinned up behind my head, because if I wore it loose, pieces would just fall out, and somebody would surely say, what's going on, Catherine? Your hair's plopping out all over the place. So I sort of wore it up, and then every evening when I got back to the hotel room, I'd take the clips out of my hair or whatever, and then tons of hair would fall out. So I wondered actually what the person that cleaned the room must have thought went on in that room, because there was masses of hair in the garbage can every day. I did manage to get through the board meeting and got home actually on the Sunday night, and my husband buzzed my head, which I think he actually quite enjoyed doing, and I used the wig the next day at work. Interestingly enough, everybody seemed to think I just had a nice new hairdo.
As long as I can remember, I've always wanted to be a mom and experience having a child. I saw a specialist and wanted to speak to her about the ramifications of becoming pregnant, and I got a very dismal outlook on the whole process of being a childbearer as a diabetic woman. The information I was given was about how many diabetic women lose the fetus during the first trimester and the difficult things that can happen to your own body.
She'd lost so much weight that her skin was tight on her bones. She was in lots of pain. I could feel it. Her breathing was a kind of a moan, and she was constantly moving and kind of rocking herself. I remember the feeling of, thank God I've come, as I started to perceive how lonely it was for her.
It was just such a bleak picture. It was kind of soul-crushing for me. Started putting it out of my head, but then I'd hear a small child and I'd just start to cry. Definitely when I found out I was pregnant, everything changed.
Certainly it would be dishonest if I said there weren't horrible moments where I despaired and worried, of course, about dying and leaving my children without a mother and all the things that anybody, I think, in that situation would experience.
She had loved scent. She was a person who lived very intensely. She loved the smell of roses. I had brought a particular cream that smelled of roses. I massaged her hands and her feet and ankles, which were horribly bloated and swollen and blue. And I think the touching was far more important than the things that I brought. Just a matter of filling the space so she could weave in and out of consciousness.
I had about a week where I was crying all the time because I just didn't know what to do. And Warren was just saying, okay, you know, I support you, whichever you decide.
I had all manner of excuses. There were children excuses. They had to go to the orthodontist, and they, you know, or I just wasn't feeling, got a little sniffle that morning. I'd be in the afternoon, and anyway, there were all manner of little lies I told to try to throw people off the scent, I guess.
One day, I was sitting in my future mother-in-law's car in the back seat, and she was running errands. And I could feel my blood sugar start to drop, so I needed candy. So I'm getting candy out of my purse. And the whole time I'm thinking, this is crazy. Don't do this. Don't risk what you've got. You've already gone through so much. You know, just phone your doctor, see what has to be done to stop this, etc. And as I'm sitting there and I'm chewing on my candies, just this kind of wave or this just kind of peace just came over me. It was like that kind of voice in the back of your head kind of thing, but I know it wasn't mine. It was from somewhere else. And it just said, you know what, you can do this.
We had moments of great intimacy. There was one point at which she opened her eyes. She said very obliquely, she said, she's crying. So I said, who's crying? And she said, I am. And I didn't get more than that.
Tell it like it is.
You know, we were Catholic. Many of us had doubts. Some of us didn't practice anymore. But I really felt that in the end there are some rituals that are comforting that should have been offered to her. Her husband was very clear. He said to me, she doesn't practice, she doesn't believe. There's no question there's not going to be a priest.
Well, the chemo was, of course, the worst. Everything else was really pretty manageable, maybe inconvenient, but pretty manageable. But the chemo really does give you a hard hit. When I had my worst moments, I tended to sort of save them for when I wasn't around other people, by and large. I had my crying jags in the middle of the night. I had my times when I'd come home and I'd just want to punch somebody's lights out. You feel so sick and it makes you angry. There were the days that I just closed my office door and just sort of shut the world out.
So I carried on. And I checked my blood sugars, and I ate healthy, and I would go through times of being up at 3 o'clock in the morning and having my arm around my stomach, just being so amazed and yet so terrified, like what if something goes wrong, and what if it doesn't work? I remember I just started feeling not good. I was getting a pain in my back. It was like 4 o'clock in the morning, and I was having trouble breathing, and I didn't know why. I remember going to emerge in the hospital and just saying, I don't feel good, I have a pain in my back, and I was just scared.
So around 5:30 in the morning, her husband came and knocked on my door and said that she had died. And would I like to come and say goodbye to her before the coroner arrived and before they came to take her body away? And so I went up, and there she was, lying in her bed with her hands clenched tight, 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 and her face completely tense and her teeth clenched and clearly fighting and anguished and tense right to the last moment, and made me sad.
But on this particularly bad day for me, it was, I think, over 40 degrees Celsius. I had this wig on my head roasting me. The air conditioning had died in my car. I was feeling nauseous from various chemos and other things. And lo and behold, 3 guys in a truck start to pace my car. And they're kind of grinning or raising eyebrows or whatever kind of facial expressions. And I'm not too sure why they do this, whether they expect people to maybe pull over and have some fun in a field or something. Well, I guess I was just in the kind of mood that I looked over at them, whipped the wig off my head, and my head was pretty gross at the time. It was kind of little tufts of things. I looked like an outtake from an alien movie or something. And the look on these guys' faces was worth it. Their jaws dropped. They took off like a shot, getting away as quickly as they possibly could from this mad person that who knew what I was going to do next.
I was strapped down to the table, and the doctors were doing what they do. It's almost a very surreal feeling because you feel everything going on and you hear everything going on, but you don't see that where the doctors are going and what they're doing and what the nurses are handing them. You're just laying there, putting it all in their hands and not knowing the next move because you're just in darkness.
On my way up the stairs is when he said to me, "Oh, by the way, you may have been right because I caught her making the sign of the cross during the night." Caught her. I didn't stay for the funeral. I had gone for her, and it was time I went home, and I got myself on the plane. And they closed the plane door, and I had like an electric storm, like a thunderbolt of anger, so great, so great. It just was very hard to deal with. I was so angry that she hadn't been loved better and that her death had been so hard.
Probably about 2/3 of the way through the chemo, I thought I had enough good news that I should tell my kids and my mother. And I remember when I told my children, I got kind of technical with them, and I just remember my 14-year-old son, Nicholas, saying to me, "All I want to know, Mummy, is are you going to be okay?" And I was happy to be able to say to him at that point, "Yes, I'm going to be okay."
And then all of a sudden, I remember the doctor saying, "And it's a little boy." And I just remember running my hand over his little body and his little face, and he just felt so beautiful.
Once all the medical procedures were over and the outlook looked very positive, I had to figure out how I was going to tell all of the various people that I had to tell about this. And our board was my top priority. They were quite surprised that I had managed to go through this period with basically keeping most of the balls in the air. They hadn't suspected anything, surprisingly enough.
It took me a long, long time to stop being very, very preoccupied with her death. I spoke to a friend who was a priest afterwards, and he told me that very few people have what you would call a good death. Many, many people die in angry or full of regret or afraid. And it was something I hadn't known before. I had not realized the extent to which you have to prepare. I really feel that most of us probably want to live our death in a way that's worthy of the life that we've lived.
At this point in time, I continue to be healthy. And all of the indications are that I will remain that way. Things like this do make you appreciate the really important things in life. And I do find myself trying to take more time with my family, with friends, just generally smelling the roses a little more, being a little kinder to myself. You know, it's unless you live this, you really don't understand it. And certainly it's been a very life-altering experience.
Now I have the most amazing, beautiful 3.5-year-old little munchkin you could hope to see, and I know every mother says that. He makes me smile every day, and there were a lot of days when I was sick and so on that I didn't smile all the time. I know now that the decision I made in that car was made for a great reason, and I'm so glad I decided what I decided to do. I'm trying to get past the crying part.
Her father would very often open a bottle of very, very great French wine in my honor in the middle of the day. That was living for me.
I remember medical professionals, and this has been said to me several times, medical professionals saying, well, you know, chemo, it's not so bad, you know. I'd say, have you had chemo? Oh, no, I haven't. And I got to the point of saying, well, what do you know?